I could not move. I could not scream. I could only lie there in the profound darkness of my childhood bedroom. My body was frozen like a corpse, while my mind screamed for help. As I lay dying in my room, my sister quietly left the door ajar for a stranger to walk in. I could not move. I heard footsteps and her whisper, "Just make it look natural." But what happened next? Who stepped into that doorway? Changed everything. I was Grant Martinez, 36 years old, a senior data analyst in Virginia. I had worked for years to build a life defined by stability. A spotless credit score, an apartment I owned, and a retirement account growing every year. It was a good life, a quiet life, built on the certainty that the only person I could rely on was myself. None of my family knew the details of my success, because in my experience, sharing an accomplishment with my parents, Richard and Gloria, or my younger sister, Lena, only invited silence or, worse, an unfavorable comparison. The quiet certainty of my life cracked the week before I came home. I was sitting at my desk when a letter arrived from the Internal Revenue Service. It claimed I had failed to report $85,000 in income from the previous year. Money I had never earned, never seen, and knew nothing about. I assumed it was a clerical mistake, or perhaps identity theft. The kind of annoying errand you deal with eventually. I planned to handle it after my trip back to Pennsylvania. My mother, Gloria, had recently undergone knee surgery, and someone needed to manage her recovery. My father certainly was not going to do it, and Lena had spent 32 years ensuring she never lifted a finger for anyone but herself. So, I requested 2 weeks off work and drove 5 hours back to the house where I learned the exhausting business of being an afterthought. I had casually mentioned the IRS letter to my mother on the phone before I left, the way you mentioned needing to refill your gas tank. I did not notice the sudden tightness in her voice, or the brief, uncomfortable silence before she changed the subject. I was too busy packing my bags and arranging for a neighbor to water my plants to notice the sound of caution. I should have paid attention. When I arrived, the dynamic was exactly as expected. I cooked, I cleaned, I managed my mother's medication schedule, and I changed her bandages. Lena showed up twice in 4 days, both times with her phone out, taking photos for social media. Her captions would read something like, "Caring for Mama, always the responsible one," complete with a heart emoji. She would stay for 20 minutes, claim an urgent meeting, and vanish. I said nothing. Protesting only made me look petty. Something I learned early in life when my father would proudly say, "Lena takes after me," before looking at me and declaring, "Grant, I don't know who you take after." On the 5th evening, the ritual changed. Lena walked into my room carrying a steaming mug. "You have been working so hard," she said, her voice unusually soft, a tone I had never heard directed at me. "I made this for you, Chamal, to help you sleep." I should have questioned it. Lena never performed kindness without an audience to witness it. But I was bone-tired, worn down by caregiving and years of feeling invisible. The herbal scent was calming. I took the mug. I drank the tea. 30 minutes later, the paralysis began. It started in my legs, a dull, electric absence, then climbed into my arms and fingers. I collapsed onto the bed, my mind a storm trapped inside a shell that had become a prison. Through the crack in the door, I saw a familiar silhouette and heard her whisper to someone outside, "Just do what Dad asked." The door creaked open, and heavy footsteps crossed the threshold. A man's silhouette blocked the faint light from the hall. He knelt beside the bed. I felt 2 fingers press against my throat. clinical and professional, checking my pulse. I could not turn my head, but I heard his breathing, shallow and uneven. He was nervous. "She's still breathing," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. This was not supposed to happen like this. The dosage was too strong. His words sent a paralyzing shock through my mind, colder than the drug coursing through my veins. Dosage. They had drugged me deliberately, and something had gone horribly wrong. I was supposed to be completely unconscious. Or worse. But instead, I was a horrified, helpless witness. He stood up, stepping back from the bed. He ran his fingers through his hair and exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with worry. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket. This was not the behavior of a killer, but a man caught in something he did not understand. Lena appeared in the doorway, her voice sharp and impatient. "She out. She is breathing," the man said, "but barely, Lena. I did not sign up for this. You said he just needed to sleep. You did not say anything about—" "Keep your voice down," Lena hissed, stepping into the room. "Dad said he has been stealing from them for years. Thousands of dollars. Did you know that? My own brother taking money from our parents while pretending to be the responsible one." The accusation was so absurd, so far from the truth, that I would have laughed if my body had obeyed me. I had not taken a single cent from them since I was 22. After Friday, Lena continued, her voice dropping to something cold and determined. "We'll not be able to touch their money anymore. The court will make sure of that. And maybe then, Dad will finally see the truth. I am the one who protected this family, not him. This feels like it's going too far." The man, the hired accomplice, shifted nervously. What if he wakes up? What if he remembers? "He will not remember anything," Lena said dismissively. "The stuff you gave him causes confusion. By the time he is coherent, it will be too late. Just do what you were hired to do. And stop asking questions." Hired. The word echoed in the paralyzed silence of my mind. This man, Marcus Webb, was not a friend of Lena's. He was an outside contractor. Someone had paid him to be here tonight. That simple transaction elevated this from a simple sisterly betrayal to a structured conspiracy. They left the room, the door closing behind them with a soft click, and I was plunged back into the darkness. My thoughts drifted, pulled by the sedative still coursing through my system. Awareness was agonizing, but it was also my only weapon. I focused on the observations I had managed to gather, the man's shaking voice, his quick apology to Lena about the dosage, and the timeline. The hearing was Friday. The drugs began to induce a strange, unsettling clarity. I drifted back to a memory from 15 years ago. My grandmother Eleanor's funeral. The church had been full, but I remembered watching my father, Richard, waiting for some crack in his stoic expression, some sign of grief. Instead, as the casket closed for the final time, his shoulders relaxed. He took a deep, steadying breath, like a man who had been holding tension for years and could finally let it go. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things. Now, trapped in my dark, silent room, I was not so sure. I forced myself to cling to Eleanor's memory. Before she passed, she had taken my hand in the hospital. "You are the strongest one in this family, Grant," she had said, looking at me with an intensity that had startled my 21-year-old self. "One day, you will understand why I am giving this to you and not them." She had pressed a small, plain tin box into my hands with the strange instruction, "Do not open this in front of your father." I had kept that box, unopened, in my Virginia apartment for 15 years, believing it was just a sentimental keepsake, not a warning. My grandmother had looked at my father, hovering in the doorway of her hospital room, impatient and checking his watch, and her expression had hardened into something close to contempt. She knew something about him, something she tried to warn me about, and I had been too naive, too desperate to believe in my family's goodness, to listen. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. The drug was beginning to metabolize, fading from my system. The paralysis began to recede, starting with my fingers. I could twitch them, then curl them into my palm. Sensation returned to my limbs like painful pins and needles, a wave of discomfort I welcomed as proof of my own survival. It meant I was regaining control. I heard footsteps in the hallway again, muffled. Lena's voice, recognizable but indistinct, said something, followed by silence. I kept my eyes closed and regulated my breathing, forcing it slow and deep, needing them to believe I was still completely unconscious. The door opened. I recognized the scent of Lena's perfume as she approached my bed. She stood there for a long moment, watching. I forced myself to remain perfectly still, my breathing even. "Still out," she murmured, before leaving the room. The door shut. I waited until I was certain she was gone. My entire body felt like thick mud. Moving was exhausting, but I managed to open my eyes. Slept. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. I turned my head slowly, testing my recovering neck muscles. Beside the bed, something small and white lay on the hardwood floor. A card, dark lettering against a pale background. It took all my strength to reach down. The movement was clumsy, my fingers still weak and clumsy, but I managed to lift it off the floor. I brought it close enough to read in the dim light. Marcus Webb. Private investigator. A private investigator in my bedroom in the middle of the night. Lena's simple, jealous sister explanation, that Grant was stealing, and she was the loyal one, no longer felt sufficient. Lena was petty, selfish, and desperate for approval, yes, but she was not sophisticated enough to hire a professional PI and orchestrate a complex drugging to achieve guardianship. This was bigger. Someone else, more powerful, was pulling the strings, and the PI's card was the thread I needed to pull. Just before dawn, I heard a car pull into the driveway. A door slammed. Heavy footsteps crossed the porch and entered the house. My father's voice, Richard's voice, cut through the morning quiet. It was sharp and commanding. He was not asking questions, he was giving orders. "Is it done?" "Good. The hearing is Friday. Make sure he stays sedated until then." He paused, and when he spoke again, his tone was cold with certainty. "And remember, he's been unstable for years. Everyone will believe it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "The hearing is Friday. He is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. He is trying to steal my life." I had 4 days. I waited until the house fell silent again. The exhaustion and ache in my muscles now overwhelmed by a desperate urgency. Moving felt like swimming through thick, cold mud, but I forced myself upright. I found my shoes by the bed and my purse on the dresser. The familiar weight of my car keys. Inside the purse was the first tangible anchor to my real life in Virginia. The life my father was trying to dissolve. I crept past my parents' bedroom, past Lena's, where I could hear her soft snoring. The front door seemed impossibly far away. Every floorboard threatened to creak under my weight. Every shadow looked like someone waiting to catch me. I slipped out into the cold morning air, into a world that felt suddenly alien and hostile, and I started driving, the engine idling low like a conspirator. I drove for 20 minutes before I saw a gas station. On my right, one of those old places that still had a working payphone. mounted near the restrooms. I pulled in, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The PI's card was still in my pocket. Marcus Webb. I did not know if I could trust him. But he was the only lead I had. I fed coins into the payphone and dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. Webb. This is Grant Martinez, I said, my voice hoarse. You were in my bedroom last night. You checked my pulse. I need to know why. There was a long, stunned pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, all traces of grogginess had vanished from his voice, replaced by alarm. You are coherent. You can talk. How is that possible? The drug wore off, I stated, leaning against the cold metal of the payphone booth. The cold air helped sharpen my mind. I heard everything. My sister, my father, all of it. Now tell me what is going on, or I am calling the police. Do not, Marcus said quickly. Not yet. Listen to me. I was not there to hurt you. I did not know what your sister was planning. He paused, gathering his words. I was hired by your father 3 weeks ago. He retained me to investigate you. He wanted me to find evidence that you were mentally unstable and financially irresponsible. He said he needed documentation for a court case. My stomach turned. What kind of court case? Guardianship, Marcus confirmed flatly. He is trying to have you declared incompetent so he can take control of your finances and your decisions. But Grant, here is the thing. I could not find any evidence against you. Your credit is excellent. Your employment history is spotless. You have no criminal record. No history of mental illness. You are one of the most stable people I have ever investigated. The wind seemed to be knocked out of me, not by the betrayal, but by the objective truth from a stranger. For 36 years, I had been told by my family that I was the lesser, the problematic one. Now, a professional investigator hired to find flaws had certified that I was, in fact, spotless. If you could not find anything, I asked, trying to keep the raw shock out of my voice, why were you at my parents' house? I went there to warn you, Marcus admitted. I figured something was wrong with the whole situation. Your father was too eager, too insistent. But when I got there, your sister intercepted me. She introduced me to your mother as a friend who knows first aid. She said you had suddenly fallen ill and asked me to check on you. I did not know about the drugging until I saw you lying there. By then it was too late. I am sorry. His apology meant little, but the information was invaluable. You said my father hired you. What exactly did he tell you? He said you had been stealing from your parents for years. Marcus repeated the lie I had overheard Lena utter. Thousands of dollars from their retirement accounts. He showed me bank statements with your signature on the withdrawal slips. He said you were mentally declining and that he needed to protect the family's assets before you drained them completely. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity. I have never touched their accounts. I have not taken a cent from my parents since I moved out at 22. I know, Marcus said, his voice now entirely professional. Because I did my job properly. I traced those withdrawals. The signatures were forged. The money did not go to you. It went to accounts controlled by your father. Over $287,000 in 3 years. He has been stealing from his own retirement fund and framing you for it. The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. My father, Richard, slept, had been forging my signature. My father had been draining his own accounts and blaming me. The scale of the deception was sickening. And Lena, I said slowly, trying to process my sister's complicity. Does she know? I do not think so, Marcus replied. Based on what I overheard last night, Your father told her you were the thief. She genuinely believes. She is protecting your parents by helping him. The sedative she gave you. Your father told her it was a mild sleep aid to help you rest while they sorted out the family finances. She did not know it would paralyze you. Lena was a pawn, a willing one, desperate for our father's approval, but a pawn nonetheless. She had drugged me, believing she was doing the right thing. It did not excuse her actions, but it explained them. The true enemy remained my father. There is more. Marcus added, his voice dropping slightly. You mentioned an Internal Revenue Service letter when I was researching you. Something about unreported income. $85,000 income you never earned. That is the trigger. I realized, the puzzle pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Your father has been using your identity for over a decade. Tax fraud, credit applications, business, loans. He took out a $150,000 mortgage in your name in 2019. The IRS letter was the first crack in his system. If you investigated that, you would find everything. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. So, he filed for guardianship 2 weeks ago as a preemptive strike. If he can get you declared incompetent on Friday, none of the fraud is traceable back to him, because he can claim you were unstable when you filed or took out the loans. 2 weeks ago. I repeated, grasping the timing. But I never received any notification. Because he listed your parents' Pennsylvania address as your residence on the petition. Marcus explained. The court notice went there. He intercepted it. You were never supposed to know about the hearing until after it happened. Everything finally clicked into place. My father had spent years making me invisible, making me seem unstable, making everyone believe I was the lesser son. It was not neglect, it was strategy. He needed me to be someone no one would believe. There is something I need to check, I told Marcus, stepping back from the payphone. The reality of my desperate situation sinking in. Meet me in Virginia this afternoon. I will text you the address. I drove back to my apartment in Virginia. The 5-hour journey a blur of cold, desperate logic. Every detail Marcus had shared solidified the horrifying truth. The neglect I had endured my whole life was not accidental. It was strategic. My father needed me to be invisible, so that when he committed theft and fraud, no one would ever listen to my claims of innocence. The financial betrayal was simply the adult extension of the emotional betrayal I had grown up with. The one last piece of the puzzle lay waiting for me. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, the familiar sight of my stable, orderly life feeling like a temporary shelter against a sudden, violent storm. I went straight to the back of my closet, where the small tin box from my grandmother Eleanor rested behind old photo albums. I had kept it exactly as she gave it to me 15 years ago. I thought it was a sentimental gesture from a dying woman. I realized now it was a silent, desperate warning. I carried the box to my kitchen table and sat down, staring at the unassuming metal for a long moment. My hand shook only slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, were 2 items: a handwritten letter and a folded legal document. The scent of aged paper and dried flowers drifted up from the box, a ghost of my grandmother's presence. I unfolded the letter first. It was Eleanor's familiar handwriting, slightly shaky from the illness that was already taking her life. My dear Grant. The letter began. Your father filed a false affidavit after I died, claiming I had no will. He stole your inheritance to cover his own substantial debts. I could not stop him before I passed, but I saved this copy. He made you invisible your whole life, so you would never question anything. But I see you, Grant. You deserve to be loved. You deserve the truth. I sank back in my chair, the letter clutched in my hand. The quiet, profound shock of that betrayal eclipsed even the terror of the paralysis. Richard had stolen my birthright, $400,000, 15 years ago, and then spent every year since actively conditioning me and the rest of the family to believe I was incapable and unworthy of responsibility. My whole life was a lie based on a single, massive fraud. The folded document was her original will. I scanned the precise legal language. It left her entire house, then valued at $400,000, specifically and unconditionally to me. Eleanor had seen through Richard's avarice and tried to protect me. When she could not prevent the theft before her death, she had hidden the evidence in the one place she knew Richard would never look. With the sun he had rendered invisible. Marcus arrived an hour later. I let him in without preamble and pointed to the documents spread across my kitchen table. He was quiet, absorbing the details, his eyes running quickly over the original will and the grandmother's letter. He looked up at me with an expression that was no longer merely professional, but tinged with reluctant admiration. The original probate fraud, he murmured, tapping the will. That was 15 years ago. Technically, it is outside the statute of limitations for the probate crime itself. My stomach dropped. So it is useless. No, Marcus countered sharply. Here is the thing. Your father has been filing false tax returns, using the proceeds or benefit from that stolen inheritance every single year since. Each return is a new felony. And that 2019 mortgage, the one he took out in your name, he used the falsely claimed ownership of Eleanor's assets as collateral. That is recent enough to prosecute, and ties directly back to identity theft and the underlying fraud. Everything connects, Grant. He spent 15 years building you into the perfect scapegoat. He set down the will and met my eyes. He made everyone believe you were unstable, so that, when this moment came, when the IRS notice arrived, when the debts mounted, no one would question it. He tried to win by default. Marcus checked his watch. The hearing is Friday. That is 4 days. If you do not prove your competency and expose him before then, you lose everything. Your money, your freedom, your identity, your entire life. He wins. 4 days. That was the deadline. I had to use the next 96 hours to reverse 15 years of calculated abuse. The paralysis, the threat, the fear, they all faded away, replaced by an iron resolve. I was not just fighting for my finances. I was fighting for my truth. I was fighting for the life my grandmother believed I deserved. The historical betrayal, laid bare by Eleanor's letter, solidified my urgency. I was not just fighting to survive a drugging. I was fighting to reclaim my entire past, present, and future from a man who had systematically tried to erase me. The clock was ticking toward Friday's guardianship hearing, leaving me exactly 4 days to build a defense that could dismantle 15 years of calculated fraud. Marcus and I worked through the first night and the entire next day. We set up a war room in my Virginia apartment. The kitchen table now buried under stacks of documents, bank statements, and legal pads. My skills as a senior data analyst, honed by years of finding patterns in vast, chaotic data sets, finally had a purpose beyond corporate consulting. I was analyzing the data of my own life. Marcus focused on the external evidence. He quickly secured security footage from my parents' house that confirmed Lena entering and leaving my room, as well as the initial conversation between her and Marcus. He also used his professional contacts to trace the $287,000 Richard had stolen from his retirement fund. We found it was not simply being hoarded. It had been routed into a series of disastrous high-risk investment accounts, controlled solely by my father. The missing money was not a nest egg. It was a black hole of debt, which explained his desperate need to gain immediate control of my legal identity. I focused on the internal documents, my pristine credit reports, my current bank statements, and the original, notarized copies of my employment records, proving my stability and competency beyond question. I cross-referenced the dates on Richard's fraudulent 2019 mortgage with the dates of my tax filings, creating a meticulous timeline that showed my father had used my identity to commit the fraud, while simultaneously using my parents' address to intercept the court notice for the current guardianship petition. Shit. The meticulity of the house I usually applied to analyzing corporate risk, I now applied to my own survival. We need more than just documents. Grant, Marcus said late on Wednesday evening, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes. We need an expert to confirm the forgery. The signatures on those withdrawal slips are the key to the $287,000, and they tie directly into the guardianship motive. By Thursday morning, we had hired a handwriting expert. The results came back hours later, definitive and cold. The signatures on the retirement withdrawal slips did not match my actual handwriting, but showed clear characteristics consistent with Richard's hand. The final piece of the legal puzzle locked into place. Finally, we met with the attorney Marcus had recommended, a woman named Sandra Chen. She specialized in complex fraud and family exploitation cases and possessed a steely, non-judgmental fury that immediately put me at ease. She took the thick binder of evidence, the will, the forged signatures, the traced accounts, the intercepted court notice, and reviewed it with swift, professional detachment. Your father spent 15 years creating a narrative, Sandra said, leaning back in her chair. That you were the irresponsible, unstable son who was emotionally and financially dependent on them. That narrative was the insurance policy against this exact moment. He was counting on the court and everyone else believing that narrative automatically. He was counting on me being invisible. I corrected, the realization hitting me with a final, sharp clarity. Precisely. Our strategy is simply, we do not just prove you are competent. Any good analyst could pass a competency test. We prove that the petition itself is a fraud. Sandra tapped the document showing the incorrect Pennsylvania address listed as my residence. Would demonstrate that the notification was deliberately diverted and that your father filed this petition in bad faith as a preemptive strike to cover up years of financial crime. I spent Thursday evening preparing for the hearing, rehearsing the facts of my life, my social security number, my full employment history, my investment portfolio strategy, my monthly budget. I recited them over and over until they were ingrained. This was the data of my stability, the undeniable proof against the fictional instability my father had invented. The cold anger I felt was no longer directed at the drug, or the darkness, or even the immediate threat. It was directed at the system of belief that had allowed my father to systematically diminish me for decades. I was not just fighting for my money. I was fighting to be seen, truly seen, for the stable, capable man I was. Outside of the toxic light of my family's approval, I looked at the documents one last time. The hearing was tomorrow. I had spent 36 years being overlooked in my own family. Tomorrow, they would finally see me, not as the scapegoat, but as the man who held the evidence of their destruction. The feeling was not triumph, but a cold, hard, strategic readiness. I had 4 days to save my own life, and the time was up. Friday morning arrived, crisp and cold. I walked into the courthouse wearing a navy blue suit I had bought for job interviews years ago, an armor of professionalism against the emotional chaos of the past week. My hands were steady. My mind was clear, focused entirely on the data and the truth I was about to present. I had spent 36 years being invisible in my own family. Today, they would finally see me, in the precise, undeniable context of the law. My father, Richard Martinez, was already seated at the petitioner's table, beside his attorney. The shock on his face when he saw me was the first true moment of triumph I allowed myself to feel. He had expected me to be still sedated in Pennsylvania, confused, helpless, and unable to appear. He had expected to win by default, thereby cementing the claim of my instability, without contest. Instead, I walked to the respondent's table with Sandra Chen, my attorney, beside me, and met his eyes without flinching. His face went pale, a mixture of disbelief and immediate calculation replacing his usual arrogant composure. The competency evaluation began first. I sat before the court-appointed evaluator, a woman with sharp, kind eyes and a professionally neutral expression. She asked the routine questions meant to gauge a person's grasp on reality, finances, and self-care. Richard's lawyer had planned for this to be a formality, a checkbox on the road to guardianship, confirming the absence of the unstable petitioner. I answered every question clearly, calmly, and correctly. I recited my social security number, my Virginia address, the name of my employer, and the details of my consulting firm. I did not simply give answers, I provided context. When asked about my finances, I did not just state my bank account details. I explained my monthly budget, my strategy for retirement contributions, and my investment philosophy using terminology Richard himself would never have understood. I described the recent acquisition of a new investment property and the due diligence I performed before purchase. The evaluator made notes and nodded, but the confusion in her eyes was unmistakable. Why had a case been filed at all? My life was a textbook example of stability and high-level professional function. The evaluation concluded in less than an hour. Then, Sandra Chen stood. Her tone was measured, cold, and utterly devastating. "Your Honor," Sandra began, addressing the judge, a formidable woman in her 60s with a reputation for merciless objectivity. "We are pleased to see Mr. Grant Martinez has demonstrated his clear, profound competency. However, we must now address the underlying motivation for the petitioner, Richard Martinez, to file this guardianship case at all, and the deeply troubling procedural irregularities that indicate this petition was filed in bad faith." Sandra presented the first set of documents. The petitioner's address in Pennsylvania as Mr. Martinez's primary residence, despite the fact that our client has lived in Virginia, in his own apartment, for over a decade. We submit proof of his utility bills and voter registration to confirm his actual residence. The judge frowned as she reviewed the documents. "This was not an error, Your Honor," Sandra continued, her voice gaining strength. "This was deliberate. The court's mandatory notification of this hearing was sent to the Pennsylvania address, which the petitioner intercepted. Grant Martinez, never supposed to know about this hearing until after the judgment had been rendered against him. This was designed to ensure he lost control of his life and finances without having a chance to speak." She used the word fraud twice in the span of 30 seconds. Richard's face was turning a sickly gray. He was leaning forward, whispering frantically to his attorney, who placed a calming hand on his arm. Slept. Sandra then presented the second exhibit, the IRS notice, and the evidence of the forged signatures and traced bank accounts. She connected the dots with brutal efficiency. The petitioner stated reason for seeking guardianship was to protect family assets from the respondent, who he claimed was unstable and stealing money. Our evidence demonstrates the reverse is true. The petitioner himself has been engaged in a systematic campaign of financial fraud and identity theft against his son, routing over $287,000 from the family accounts into his own failed investments, and using his son's identity to secure a fraudulent mortgage in 2019. She paused, allowing the sheer weight of the accusation to settle. This guardianship petition, Your Honor, is nothing more than a preemptive legal maneuver, a desperate attempt to weaponize the court system against his victim and cover up years of serious criminal activity by having the victim declared incompetent. The judge leaned forward, her face darkening. She looked at Richard Martinez with an expression I had never seen anyone direct at him before. Raw, cold suspicion. This petition is dismissed, the judge announced, her voice ringing with authority. Furthermore, and given the serious allegations and the documented irregularities in the filing of this case, I am ordering an immediate, comprehensive investigation by the relevant authorities into the financial records presented here today. Mr. Martinez. Mr. Martinez, she directed her words straight at my father. I strongly suggest you retain new legal counsel. You will undoubtedly need it. Richard's composure collapsed entirely. He opened his mouth to protest, to issue dismissive commands he had used my entire life, but his attorney clamped a hand over his arm and shook his head firmly. They gathered their papers, defeated, and left the courtroom without looking at me. I sat back in my chair, the tension draining out of me. The battle was won. I had been seen, and I had been believed by an impartial, powerful third party. The invisible sun had finally, decisively, appeared. The quiet relief that washed over me was profound. The knowledge that I had been right, and Richard had been wrong, was worth every sleepless hour and every moment of terror I had endured. The courtroom dismissal had been the first battle, a critical victory that neutralized the immediate threat of guardianship. But the war against 15 years of systematic fraud was far from over. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus and I worked tirelessly to build a criminal case, piece by piece, against my father. We had the evidence of his intent, and now we needed to solidify the paper trail into an airtight prosecution. Marcus obtained security footage from my parents' house, showing Lena entering my room multiple times, searching through my documents and belongings in the days leading up to the drugging. This confirmed her active role in the conspiracy. The handwriting expert's analysis slept, confirming Richard's forgery on the $287,000 withdrawal slips, became the centerpiece of the financial fraud charge. We traced every cent of the stolen money into Richard's highly volatile investment accounts, confirming his desperation. The authenticated will from my grandmother Eleanor proved the probate fraud, a crime he had successfully hidden for a decade and a half. The 2019 mortgage documents proved the identity theft. Marcus, through continued legal investigation, also obtained recorded phone conversations where my father discussed, in explicit detail, how to manage me and keep me under control, referencing my supposed instability. Every single piece of data connected to form a complete irrefutable picture of my father's predatory behavior, a man who saw his own son not as family, but as a convenient name to sign on fraudulent documents. When we had everything compiled into a thick folder, loan documents, transaction records, the confirmed will, and the recordings, I knew it was time for the final, personal confrontation. I did not send a warning. I drove to the house in Pennsylvania for the last time. I found Richard, Lena, and my mother, Gloria, gathered in the living room with their defense attorney. Their conversation hushed and stressed, clearly discussing damage control after the courtroom fiasco. Lena was pale and drawn, her usual polished demeanor frayed by fear. They all looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, pregnant with all the unsaid truths of my life. I placed the folder on the coffee table. The thud of the paper hitting the wood was deafening. "Dad." "Lena," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "I think it is time we talked honestly. Maybe for the first time ever." The attorney, a stern man with nervous eyes, picked up the folder and began flipping through the pages. As he read the authenticated will and the handwriting analysis, his face changed instantly. First confusion, then alarm, then something close to fear. He stood up abruptly, placing the folder back on the table. "I need to excuse myself," he announced, gathering his briefcase. "Richard, I strongly advise you not to say anything further without new counsel present." He left without looking back, the door closing behind him with a sound that felt like a verdict. My father straightened in his chair, attempting one last time to regain his authority. "You have always been unstable, Grant." He spat, his voice trembling slightly. "This fantasy you have constructed proves it. No one will believe this." "Then you will not mind if I play these recordings for the police," I said calmly. I placed a small digital recorder on the table. "They are already on their way. I called them 2 hours ago." Richard's bluff collapsed. I watched the confidence drain from his eyes, replaced by desperation, and then a furious, ugly cornered malice. Lena broke first. Her voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. "Dad told me you were stealing from them," she cried. "He showed me the bank statements. He said you never loved this family, that you were just waiting for them to die, so you could take everything. I was trying to protect them, Grant. I was trying to be a good daughter." I looked at my sister, truly looked at her for the first time. Not as the golden child, but as another victim of Richard's manipulation. A victim who had chosen not to question, not to verify, not to think for herself. A victim whose desperation for approval had made her a willing accomplice. "Use both of us, Lena," I said quietly. "The difference is I survived on my own. You needed his approval so badly you would believe anything he told you. Even lies about your own brother." My father turned on Lena with a viciousness I had never witnessed, his mask falling completely. "You stupid girl! You could not even handle a simple task. All you had to do was keep him sedated until the hearing? 3 days. And you could not even manage that." His true face was revealed, not a loving father, but a desperate man who saw his children as tools to be used and discarded. A sound from the hallway made us all turn. My mother, Gloria, emerged from the shadows trembling, her face wet with tears. "I knew Grant," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I knew everything. For years. Your father threatened me. He said he would leave me with nothing if I ever told you about the will. I was terrified of being alone, so I hid your grandmother's letter in that tin box, hoping someday you would find it on your own. I would not have to be the one to tell you." She covered her face with her hands. "I was a coward. I looked at my mother with something beyond anger. A profound, exhausted understanding of who she was. A woman who chose silence over her own son's safety. "Yes, Mom," I said. "You were." Police sirens cut through the evening air. Red and blue lights flashing through the living room windows. Officers entered the house, moving swiftly and efficiently. I stepped aside to let them pass. They handcuffed my father first. He protested loudly about family misunderstandings and personal disputes, but the officers ignored him. They had already reviewed the evidence. Then, they read Lena her rights for her role in the conspiracy. She went quietly, tears streaming down her face, looking back at me with an expression of pure, shattered belief. My eyes remained fixed on my mother. I watched her realize that 40 years of silence had not protected anyone. It had only ensured that when the destruction finally came, it would be complete and devastating. 6 months passed before the legal system delivered its final verdicts. 6 months of depositions, hearings, and forensic evidence reviews. Watching my family's carefully constructed faade crumble piece by piece under the weight of documented truth. It was a long, cold process, but it was necessary for the complete demolition of the lies. My father's sentencing took place on a gray Tuesday morning in federal court. I sat in the gallery, dressed simply, my hands folded in my lap. I had no prepared statement. I had no desire to speak. I only wanted to watch. Richard Martinez stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled, his silver hair unkempt for the first time I could remember. Even now, facing the consequences of 15 years of fraud, he refused to accept responsibility. "My son fabricated all of this," he declared, his voice carrying the same dismissive tone he had used my entire life. "He has always been jealous, always been unstable. This family would have been fine without his interference." The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for deflection, leaned forward. "Mr. Martinez, the evidence against you is overwhelming and meticulously documented. You spent 15 years systematically exploiting your own son while ensuring he had no voice to defend himself. You stole his inheritance. You stole his identity. And you attempted to steal his freedom through a fraudulent guardianship petition. The only thing unstable in this courtroom is your moral character." She paused, letting her words settle over the silent courtroom. 12 years in federal prison, no possibility of early parole. I watched them lead my father away in handcuffs. He did not look at me. He had never truly looked at me, not once in 36 years. I was merely a tool to him, a convenient target, a name to sign on fraudulent documents. And now I was the reason he would spend the next 12 years behind bars. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet, profound relief that I had finally been believed after a lifetime of being told I was wrong, I was worthless, I was nothing. A courtroom full of strangers had looked at the evidence and seen the truth. Lena's sentencing came 2 weeks later. The charges against her were serious: financial fraud, conspiracy, and administering a controlled substance without consent. But the court acknowledged that she had been manipulated by our father. She received 3 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and mandatory psychological counseling. She found me outside the courthouse after the hearing, her makeup ruined from crying, her designer clothes wrinkled and unkempt. She looked smaller than I remembered, like someone who had finally stopped performing and discovered she did not know who she really was. "I was so desperate for him to love me," she said, her voice breaking. "The way he seemed to love the idea of me. I never stopped to ask why he needed me to hate you. I just believed everything he said, because believing him was easier than questioning him. I am so sorry. Grant, I am so sorry for everything. I looked at my sister for a long moment. I saw the girl who had grown up basking in our father's approval, while I stood in the shadows. I saw the woman who had put something in my drink without asking what it would do. I saw someone who had made choices, terrible choices, and was only now beginning to understand their weight. I believe you are sorry, Lena, I said. I even believe you did not fully understand what you were doing. But you chose not to understand. You chose to believe I was a thief without ever asking me directly. You chose to put something in my drink without knowing what it really was. Those were your choices. Being manipulated does not erase them. I paused, searching for words that were honest without being cruel. I hope you find out who you are without Dad's approval to chase. I really do. But that is a journey you take alone? Not with me. I walked away without embracing her. There was no reconciliation. There was only the truth, spoken clearly for the first time between us. With my father imprisoned, and all his assets frozen for restitution, my mother, Gloria, lost everything. The family home was sold. All of Richard's retirement accounts, investments, and personal property went toward repaying what had been stolen from me. The court ordered full restitution of $400,000, and after liquidating everything, I recovered $340,000. My mother came to me a month after the sentencing, standing on the doorstep of my Virginia apartment with a single suitcase and desperation in her eyes. I have nowhere to go, she said. I know I do not deserve it, but could I stay with you? Just until I figure things out. My answer was instant and without hesitation. No, Mom. You chose silence for 36 years. You watched him diminish me, use me, steal from me, and you said nothing. You knew about Grandma's will. You knew what he was doing with my identity, and your solution was to hide a letter in a box and hope I would magically find it someday. I took a steadying breath. You are 64 years old, and you have never once stood on your own. That is not my fault, and it is not my responsibility to fix you. You need to learn who you are without someone else making your decisions. That is your work now, not mine. She moved into a small one-bedroom apartment across town. For the first time in over 40 years, she had to manage her own life, pay her own bills, and make her own choices. It was not punishment, it was consequence. I did not keep the restitution money for myself. Instead, I used it to establish the Eleanor Martinez Foundation, named after the grandmother who had seen me clearly when everyone else looked right through me. The foundation provides legal resources, financial education, and support services for victims escaping financial abuse and family exploitation. Its motto is simple: your worth was never theirs to decide. I bought a small cottage by a quiet lake in Virginia. I filled it with books, plants, and a kind of silence I had never known before. A peaceful silence, not the suffocating kind I grew up with. 6 months after everything ended, my mother came to visit. I allowed her inside for 1 cup of tea, but the boundaries between us remained clear and firm. I am proud of you, she said quietly, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. I should have said that years ago, decades ago. Yes, I agreed. You should have. Her eyes filled with tears. Can you ever forgive me? I considered the question carefully. I do not know yet, Mom. Maybe someday. But I want you to understand something: forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. Healing does not require forgetting. I can release the anger without inviting you back into my daily life. I can understand your fear without excusing what it cost me. I set down my teacup. I am choosing to heal. That is about me, not about you. And right now, healing means building a life where I decide who gets access to it. She nodded. She did not argue. Perhaps she finally understood. That night, after she left, I stood on my porch and watched the sunset over the lake. I thought about the boy I used to be. Invisible, unheard, convinced that his family's blindness meant he had no value. I thought about my grandmother, who saw me when no one else did, who hid the truth in a tin box and trusted me to find it when I was ready. I thought about the night I lay paralyzed in darkness, waiting for the end, only to discover that the door opening was not death at all. It was the beginning of everything. I am the strongest one in my family, not because I never fell, but because when I finally understood why I kept falling, I stopped letting them push me down. I see my own worth now, and that is enough.